Diving in, the first thing I would suggest doing is really prioritizing your goals. If you're looking at your garden, a lot of times it can seem overwhelming if you're thinking like, okay, there's this big whole thing that we have to do. If you look at your garden and you figure out like, okay, well, we know we need screening, or we know we want to do some hardscaping. Or we want to plant vegetables, it just sort of breaks it down into bite-sized pieces that you can look at and sort of like tackle one at a time. So prioritize your goals for your garden. I think that's a really critical step going forward. Um, then establishing a budget. This is also really key. I think a lot of people don't have a sense of what everything costs when you are doing a garden. Um, Gardening is kind of like when you're doing a home renovation, you can consider price per square foot when you are doing something. So if you're looking at a space or you're looking at lawn replacement or whatever you're doing, to replace or to plant that space could be anywhere from like $4 a square foot to $100 and up, depending on, what you're planting, if it's hedging or trees or whatnot. And so establishing your budget is going to be a critical step. If you're just like, okay, I have $500 this season, I want to have some border color, let's focus on that. So it can be helpful to think about that. I do want to, I'm going to have some slides down in the designing portion about native sod, but I did want to talk about it just really briefly in the price per square foot mention is native, considering native sod in your garden for if you're doing a lawn replacement or if you're trying to fill in a big space, because native sod is $2.80 per square foot, and it's a native grass. It has a deeper root structure. The roots go down about 4 feet or so, and it's equivalent to any drought tolerant plant once it's established. And so that can be really helpful to sort of cut down or the budget if you have to fill in a big space. It's like a carpet, you roll it out like any other traditional sod, but it's native and you can mow it like a traditional sod or let it be more meadowy. And I'll talk more about that in the design portion. And then I also wanted to go over typical labor rates. So we kind of identify two different levels of like if you're going to have somebody install this, we sort of identify two different levels of gardeners, and one is sort of less detail oriented. Um, we kind of lovingly call them mow and blow gardeners. And they typically are between 35 and 55 per person per hour. And then more detail oriented is between 65 and 85 per person per hour. The We're not sure with mow and blow gardeners if they're checking the irrigation or checking if they're fertilizing or if they're assessing for disease and insects and whatnot. And so, what I usually recommend to clients is to budget out having somebody more detail oriented coming in 3 or 4 times a year to really just do that assessing and making sure that everything's running efficiently. It ends up being less expensive in the long run because you don't have to backpedal and fix a bunch of stuff that was poorly maintained. Okay, so let's go through the order of projects. If you're looking to design your space, demo is going to be the first step. And by demo, I mean just take out anything that you don't want. If you're looking at a plant that has been there for several years and it's been struggling, and it's time to let it go, get rid of it, because what we're able to do is really see the space clearer. We can see where we want to fill in, uh, and it gives sort of the canvas. It gives the space to see where we need to fill. So definitely demoing is a critical first step. This is something where going back to typical labor rates, I would say if you're going to have somebody demo and you're not doing it yourself, it doesn't take a more detail oriented gardener to demo. It's just get the plant. You don't have to worry about how it's being done. Just get the plants out. So the least expensive you can do that, the best. Um, okay. Hardscaping, if you're considering doing any hardscaping, I usually recommend that to be next in your project. The thing is any hardscaping, if you do the garden first and then you do the hardscaping, a lot of times the plants get pretty trashed. And so it's good to just like if you know that you want to put in a pathway or decking or you need some fencing or whatnot, I would recommend doing that first. Just so you have that set and we don't have to worry about the plants while that's being done. And so hardscaping would definitely be the next step if that's in your priority goals. You can also have the irrigation main lines set out. So the main lines are the 3/4 inch tubing that you pull irrigation off of to go to each plant. So really like once you clean the canvas, if you do any hardscaping, then we can put in these irrigation main lines just so it's ready. So when we do put the plants in, it's easy to sort of pull the irrigation to each of the plants and water them appropriately. So if you can do this yourself, if you are really want to tackle a DIY project, a lot of irrigation can be done from your hose tap and you can just get a hose end timer and it's kind of like, I don't know, like Legos or Connects or something. I mean, you just connecting stuff together, tubes, PVC. And the hose end timers are pretty easy to just set yourself. And so this is possible to do, as a homeowner, but you can also hire somebody to just at least lay the irrigation main lines. So you have that ready for you. Next, soil is a really critical step when you are going to plant anything. And we've done so many classes on soil. Taylor knows we've done them together. And especially from my perspective, I would say that in the last like 6 or 7 years, soil has become, we've really identified how critical soil health is to the overall health of your garden. It helps with the plants to be more drought tolerant, more disease resistant. They take nutrients up better. So there's no sense in doing any garden project without amending your soil. Um, and we will also recommend amending your soil every year because we want to maintain all the microbes and everything that's happening underneath. So amending your soil, if that's the biggest takeaway, definitely add new soil to any garden project that you're doing. And so anyway, amending the soil, and then I like to place out all the plants. I'll talk about this in the design portion, but I think it's kind of fun once you get the plants that you like together to just sort of play with it a little bit and place them out. You can look at it from different angles. If you're seeing it from a window or if you're seeing it from a patio or whatnot, you can just look at it at different angles and kind of play around with it. And I think that's kind of fun. This garden, you'll see, this is a garden I designed, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I've showed a few different okay. So it's kind of fun to just see the project going through. And then this is planted, which is fun to see it in the ground, right? So, and I wanted to show one thing when we're thinking about the like designing your garden is we like to consider it established after 2 to 3 years. And so this picture right here is right after we just planted it. Also, when you're thinking about drought tolerant or native plants, they're not considered drought tolerant until they're considered established, which is at least 8 to 12 months. So all of those plants need regular water in that time. So this is the garden planted, and this is that same garden 2 or 3 years later. It's super fun to see it grow in. And this garden, the client wanted a little bit of a higher maintenance garden, which nobody asked for. So I thought it was kind of fun. They wanted hydrangeas and roses and whatnot. But we still had some different textures and border color and everything. So, and then I wanted to show another. This is when we first planted it on the left. And then on the right, it's grown in, 2 or 3 years. So just keeping in mind, right when you plant it, it's not going to be this like overflowing, thing or whatever, but just a little time and everything starts growing in, and it's really fun to sort of watch it grow up. Okay. Anybody have any questions on that before I go to design tips?
Yeah, amazing, Jen. Thank you. Anyone, if you have some good questions, bring them in. I have a couple that as we were going through it, I had some ideas and some thoughts about your different topics. I really appreciated the idea of talking about the different uses of gardeners and like there are so many wild people like people out there who know so many different things and different kinds of gardeners and sometimes they are more adept at one kind of thing than other and some of them are really more for that maintenance. They really help you keep your garden looking good and those like tasks that are just kind of more tedious or something that just needs to be done versus the ones that are really detail oriented and they put that extra time into really knowing the plants and putting them in. So a
Totally.
really cool idea between that and having that in your mind when you're trying to think about long-term care for the garden, because the first design is one thing, but then the long-term care is another to keep it looking good.
Mhm.
I had one question about, have you had any projects or when you're starting a design and you have like a large tree or a few trees in the area and the design person or the person that wants this yard maybe doesn't want that tree, what is it like to actually take apart and demo things that are actually pretty established?
I mean, it depends on the tree because some, you can just cut down and it depends. Like some will not sucker out. Like if you leave the trunk, some once you when you cut it, it'll just die. And others you might have to worry about it starting to grow from the base of the trunk. Um, in which case you'd want to dig it out as much as possible or try to kill the stump off either with a stump killer or by wrapping it in plastic and having it basically suffocate. Um, and then if it's something like, a large, I don't know, juniper or, the roots are super gnarly underneath. And so that's like chainsaws and everything that you have to use to get them out. But yeah, I mean, definitely, that can be a thing where you'll want to reassess your garden. Sometimes it's like you need some more sunlight. You want some more sunlight in your garden to grow your veggies or, grow the flowers that you want. And maybe that involves eliminating a tree. Um, I won't judge for that, especially if it's like an acacia or, something invasive. Um, and you can always, plant more trees just in a different location that is not gonna affect your whatever you want to plant.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Definitely. Similarly, I feel like with if you are doing demo involving like hardscaping, like you have a hardscape or concrete that was placed 40 years ago and you don't really like where it's placed, or you want some more growing
Hmm.
space or something like that, it is a substantial project that you need to think about, especially going into it to then clear your space, which I think is an important one. Does the demoing kind of take a couple of days? Do you feel like it can happen pretty quick if you have a right team? What's the timeline on that kind of part?
Yeah, it totally depends on how much you're demoing and how many people. But I think, within a day or two, you can get a pretty good, you know, clearing. I did just see, just when you were talking, it made me think of, I just went to a recent project where somebody had demoed a bunch of concrete that they had concrete pathways, and then they ended up using the concrete chunks as a retaining wall to sort of build up a raised bed. And I was really impressed by it. I really liked it. They just dry stacked it.
Good.
So you can look at your resource, you can look at your resources and kind of see how you can reuse them. And I think that's super creative.
Yeah, I like the idea of repurposing what you can and then
Yeah.
like getting it out of there in the best way possible. Otherwise, another really nice point that I think is very important when talking about these designs, I'm sure you'll be mentioning it more as you talk about picking the plants and everything, is just understanding that when you first plant everything, it's gonna look small, it's gonna look a little bit on the bare side, they're gonna look a little bit of a skimpier kinds of plants, but that's part of the process and it is a time thing. Plants are a time-based system, and especially large, more established like plants that are going to establish the spacing of your garden, less of like the flowering and like the seasonal stuff, but the larger bushes and
Mhm.
trees and all that stuff is important to understand that you might start it out small, but they will grow in and knowing that sizing.
Yeah, that's a super good point. So that can go back to budget too. So you pay for time with plants. So for example, a 5 gallon plant might be around $60 versus a 15-gallon plant would be, 170 to 200. And really that's de depending on the plant, that's 3 to 5 years growth you're paying for, right?
Yeah.
So, when you're looking at your budget and so say you want a screen, that's a priority. I mean, it might be worth it to put a chunk of the budget towards a larger screen. So you don't have to wait that 3 to 5 years for it to fill in. And then you can do smaller plants for color or, whatever.
Yeah. We had
Hmm.
one good question really come in that was talking about replanting, which I think is another really important thing because a lot of times as a designer like you would come into your location and you have a couple really cool plants, you have a beautiful, they're mentioning about roses, and I think that's a great option because roses are very sentimental to a lot of people. If you have a beautiful rose, but it's really not in the right space and it's affecting the design, what is the process and the idea about transplanting it and moving it? Is that a bad idea? How can you approach that?
Well, the thing to consider with transplanting is that we really need to reconcentrate the energy of the plant to the core of the plant because you have to imagine that the transplanting is it's going to stress out the plant, right? So if there's a big tree or a big rose and there's a lot of branches and leaves and stuff going, 6, 8, 10 feet, that's a lot for that plant to be able to sort of metabolize and feed through through a stress time. So what we usually recommend is cutting the plant, in half, ideally, whether it's a rose or, a large shrub or something, because by pruning it in half, you're reconcentrating that energy back to the core. And so the plant is going to be able to transplant easier. You also want to be sure to get as much of the root as possible. The roots typically are about the same as what you see above the ground. So as big as the plant is above the ground, it is below. And so the more you can get of the root, the better. But yeah, cutting it back, I would say, is a critical step and then definitely amend the soil and definitely use transplant fertilizer.
Yeah. No,
Hmm.
definitely. And it's being careful with it as well, understanding that this plant is going to go through a bit of a stress moment and being a little bit more attentive to the watering and just the whole situation and when you're moving around and not banging around. So yeah, retransplanting and moving stuff around is definitely a part of the garden and part of the whole process. And a good thing to bring up when you talk with your designer or yourself.
Yeah,
Cool.
I heard a quote once where it's something like, I like to change my plant's perspective in the garden. So it's like thinking about your plants, like maybe they want a different view sometimes, you can just like move them around. So, I
Very
mean,
true.
that's fun to do and kind of like rework it and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to move on to the next portion and we can pull some more questions if anyone has any more? And
Sure.
if you're listening to this in the future, if you would like to ask some questions, join us for our live webinars.
Okay, well, this is the fun part because it's the designing your garden. And I did want to say a note about this. So one thing that we've been doing a lot through Sloat's design department is what we're calling dynamic design. And as many years as I've been doing this, I tend to find it to be the most efficient and the most effective. I think, like I was saying, I think it's really easy to overthink, your garden and what you're going to do for it. And so the concept with dynamic design is really like, okay, once you've established your budget and once you've established your priorities, you go into the nursery, sort of searching for that, for whatever you're trying to, fill those goals with. And then once you buy those plants, get them to your property and then place sort of have them on site and sort of do a live design in the moment and sort of how it feels once you get them to your space. It happens when you do a drawing, it happens once you get the plants to the garden anyways, you end up shifting around stuff. So I just kind of think if you know that you like the plant and you know that it's fulfilling whatever you're looking for in the garden, just get it to the garden and just kind of play around with where you want to put it. And then it doesn't seem, to me, it doesn't seem as overwhelming maybe because you can just sort of have fun with it. Okay, but what I would say with designing your garden is a good thing to look at is what is doing well in your neighborhood. So just taking a walk around, especially looking at the plants that are at the same exposure that you have. We have so many microclimates in the Bay that um, it definitely is helpful to know what's working in your neighborhood, um, because that, you know, because we can sort of check that box off basically. And so that's a really helpful way to start, just going, taking a walk, taking pictures. You can bring in your pictures to the nursery. We can tell you what the plants are, and show you them. And so anyway, that's a good first step. And the next would be to sort of identify your zones in your garden. And I would say sun exposure is, it's a big zone. You'll want to pay attention to it. And so when you go shopping for plants, a lot of plants will have on their labels full sun, part sun, or shade. And full sun typically means 5 hours or more. And then part sun is 3 to 5 hours, and then shade is less than 3 hours. But the afternoon sun is more intense than the morning sun. So if you're in Contra Costa or if you're in Novato or something, and you've got 3 or 4 hours of super intense afternoon sun, you can do a full sun plant. So just getting to know your sun exposure is very helpful in determining the plants you'll pick out. Water requirements too. So this is something to consider if you have an existing landscape that you're adding to, specifically if you have a lawn, that the lawn will be getting, anywhere around the perimeter of the lawn is going to be getting more water than stuff further away from the lawn. You can use that to your design. If you want to incorporate plants that require a little bit more water, you can put them closer to the lawn border and they will be able to absorb some of that runoff. And then plants that need less water, be sure to group those together too. Um, Also keep in mind if you have established shrubs and whatnot, those have become more drought tolerant over time. So adding new plants, you just want to be sure that that they can be compatible with the watering. Okay, this is a big thing that I really believe in, and the idea is that you don't want the whole garden to go to sleep, for a few months during the year, right? Like you want to have an evergreen backbone to it. So thinking about your combinations in the sense of what's it going to look like when none of this is blooming? Like what's going to be here? And thinking about texture and whatnot. This is the exact same garden, these two pictures. And so when the garden is dormant, we still have that evergreen backbone. We can do some seasonal annual color, which we do. We'll bring in impatiens or cyclamen and stuff like that when some of the other stuff isn't blooming. But what it gives the space is just this grounding to it. So it's not like everything dies off for, October through February, basically. So definitely whatever your space is, consider putting something evergreen in. So evergreen does not mean like a Christmas tree. Evergreen means like it stays green year round. So anything that keeps its leaves on year round is considered evergreen. And then we identify perennials and annuals. So perennials is many years or many seasons, and annual is one season. So just considering that in terms of your combinations and sort of having a space for all of those sort of creates year-round interest through the seasons. Okay, and this is something that I just, it's like we've all heard that odd numbers are, we want to plant in odd numbers for design. I'm sure everybody's heard that. And I agree. I mean, if you're picking out plants, three, fives, and sevens for sure, or, picking odd numbers. But then I also recommend repeating that color or that shape. Um, in odd numbers through the space. And I kind of like do triangles. So I don't know if you can tell, this is the same garden, this picture I designed. And the left picture is looking at it, one way, and the right picture is like turning around and looking at it, you know, going down the other way. Okay. And so what we did was we did grasses. You can see if you look on the left side, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but there's grasses on the left side over here and on the right side, so that balances out. And there's grasses on either side. And we did lavender too, so that's all balanced out here. But if you look on the right side, we also carried it up through the space. So we have more grasses and more lavender up here. So really, if you can imagine it, there's a triangle of these textures and colors that's really just sort of like coming around and making your eye go through the space, and make it seem more intentional and whatnot. That it helps bring it together. Also, I'm a big fan of repeating in swaths. I mean, you make more impact if you do a blob of plants versus just like one here, one there. If you're thinking of the odd numbers and you're getting plants in threes or fives or sevens, I mean, putting those all together is really going to make a lot more impact than just having the one plant. And again, it looks more designery, I think, and more intentional because it has more of an impact, right? So just having those groupings of plants and putting them together, I think, is very helpful. Also makes it easier to maintain. Um, if you've got like a group of the same thing together, you can, prune that all at once or whatever instead of having to sort through and prune one thing here and whatnot. Less is more too. So instead of like, um, you know, having 50 different plants, maybe come up with like seven or 10 and just repeating those. This is a garden that I did years ago and I just drove by it the other day and I was like, oh, okay, that filled out. It's super modern. We did there's like two plants there. But it gives a nice feel to it. It's contemporary, it's super easy, just, green, textural. So you don't have to like go crazy with, color and whatnot. And you could do something like this and then look and see where you want to fill. So you could do this, and this is a total evergreen backbone, where there's space along the front perimeter where they could look at it and add color if they wanted or not. I think it's much easier to add than subtract. And so, get in the plants that you know that you want, that you've prioritized in your budget, and then step back and look at it for a season and then see how it's growing in. And then we can add, more here or there. And so it's easy, it's easier to add than subtract. Okay, and this is getting back to what I was talking about before with the native grass, is I really think the one thing that lawns do is provide us with a visual resting spot. And there's really nothing that compares to just a lawn, right? I mean, but now it's like that's like a lawn is like a four-letter word in the Bay Area. We don't want to have lawns. Nobody wants to have lawns anymore. And I get it, but that's a plug for native lawns because they can provide that visual resting spot. They're cheaper per square foot than, another plant. And they give us that green swath. That's nice and it's pretty. You can mow it, like I said, like a traditional lawn, or you can have it be more meadowy where it would be tufts of grass. These are all three gardens that I designed, and the left and middle one are native sod, and then the right one, it's kind of hard to tell. But if you look sort of in the foreground, we did Diamondia as a lawn, and that's something to look into. It's an incredibly resilient lawn substitute. Does really, really well, super matted. It's going to be more per square foot than the native sod, but it's an alternate. You don't have to mow it. Drought tolerant, and again, it provides that visual resting spot. Okay. Um, Another thing that's fun is to just sort of think about, adding elements. Sloat just got in these globes, these ceramic globes, that I'm a big fan of. I should also mention that maybe I was the reason why we have the globes, so y'all need to put them in your garden. But I like, but it's nice, right? It's a nice, like, it looks, you could just put a globe with a grouping of containers and it instantly looks a little bit more designer. Okay. And so you can do that. Boulders, of course. I've been in this kick, I want to say, for the last, I don't know how long, but it's just like I step back and I look at a garden and I'm like, you know what, this needs a boulder. And it's never a bad idea, ever. And it's an easy way to just add a different element. It takes up space that you're not going to water. Um, it can be a place where you can sit. It's a way to add a little bit of personality to your garden. You can go, it's kind of fun. I know families have gone together and picked out a boulder for the garden, and everybody, it can be like a family activity. It's fun to go to, pick out boulders. And so that can be a really fun ad. And then lighting is really, that can be a really critical part to your garden too. Like, I'm obsessed with uplighting. We can uplight everything. And it makes it more usable, throughout the day, even, at night. And it gives it a little bit more of, like I said, just a design, more intentional organization to it. And you can enjoy it. Okay, this is the last part. I know this is a lot of info. So I just did want to say a little bit about maintenance and my thing. I've been doing consultations for over 20 years, and the thing that I say at every consultation is 70% of the garden is the stuff you don't see. The soil, the fertilizer, and the water are the most critical. Um, Once making sure that you're mending the soil every year, making sure that your irrigation is assessed every year is critical. So if you just moved into a new house, definitely have your irrigation assessed. If you've lived in a house for a long time, that irrigation needs to be assessed every year. These are checkpoints that really are critical in your overall success for your garden. And it also, if they're lined up, it ends up being less maintenance and less expensive in the long run because you're not going to have to backpedal and fix all of this stuff. And fertilizing too, of course, we want to make sure the plants are getting food, and pruning is helpful as well. I think that's It. Yes. Okay. I know that was a lot of information. I wanted to get through it quickly, but I'm open to questions. I did put my QR for my Instagram if you wanted to look at some of my work. And like Taylor said, Sloat does have a design department. Um, we can come out and just do sort of the range of how we can help you is we can just come out and do a 1 hour consultation. Or on the other end of the spectrum, we can do a full design plan for you. And like I said, we can do dynamic design. We can meet at the store and look at plants together. So our department is here to help you and whatever is best for your process. So, any questions?
Yeah, nice. Really great like layout. It's nice to see kind of your process because I've had you come into our stores many times and do these dynamic designs are amazing when you can actually choose the stuff in the stores, but also just the designs that you build as well. Being able to see the process of how you got there is really, really interesting. So thank you for all
It's
the
fun. It's
tips and
super fun.
ideas. And it does
Hmm
seem, it takes an eye, but it also seems very doable for anyone and any level can kind of create some sort of nice landscape that they really want to be part of.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
one thing that I was really appreciating and I think could be talked about even a little bit more is just the idea of the different levels of plants and having like your trees are your high points, you have your larger established bushes as your mid to higher points, you have some smaller established, maybe perennial or annuals or perennials or flowering color, and then you have your like ground cover moments. And I think
Hmm
like when you're saying about lawns and stuff like that, and just having those ground cover moments, filling in the space around, if you can definitely do barks and things as one option, but also if you want greenery everywhere looking for different options. And shout out to that the Mondia. There's some really great
Mm,
times in our store. There's a lot of
hmm
different options to really add some nice little green elements that are just low and very subtle.
hmm Yeah, absolutely.
One kind of question that was coming up, and I think it's a question that a lot of people will have, especially when designing, is if they have a garden space that is a bit overgrown or it's been going through a long-term change and not really been designed or not really been maintained for a long time, without doing a full just a wipe and then re-landscaping, what's some ways that you can think about integrating new designs into a garden that is maybe more established or overgrown already?
I mean, start cutting, just prune back a bunch of stuff. A lot of times we will, what you'll notice is like if you've got some older shrubs that you don't like, maybe you just don't want to like remove or clear out a whole space. What you'll find is if you cut those back, and I'm saying like, don't be shy about cutting. Like literally, you can cut a lot of stuff in half and it's going to come back and be a lot more beautiful for you. And so what you can do is start cutting those plants back and then back to soil again is if you start amending that spot with the compost, with the soil amendment, what you'll find is those existing plants that you've cut back are going to respond incredibly. And so they'll start leafing out. The soil is basically a nitrogen source, and nitrogen is what helps the leaves grow. And so, cutting back and sort of getting control over those kind of like old rangy shrubs, and then adding that compost, they're going to start leafing out most likely a lot fresher, greener, softer. And but that's also going to allow you to have some space to do some planting around them by cutting them back. So you don't have to remove everything to add new plants for sure.
Cool. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. It's all a process. Definitely come into the garden centers and talk with us. We'll give you some nice ideas. I think some of those really fast, smaller scale transitions and replacements are something that we are very happy to help you with. If you want to like just get a couple plants to fill in around, and then we can also set you to our designers if you want to do something a little bit larger or more involved throughout the whole garden.
hmm
We know we're getting towards the end, so I have a couple other questions we'll try and go through a little bit on the
hmm
quicker side. So I think one was just asking, do you do garden blueprints? Do you draw your designs beforehand? What do you feel like is the benefit and the downside to that?
Well, so I do drawings, and I think that the biggest benefit to a drawing would be if you're trying to figure out like pathways or, a patio area or something like that, just so you can at least get a sense of spacing. Where's that gonna go? I don't I think that's what I was talking about with dynamic design. I think with the plants, I think having it be a little bit more fluid and not just like drawn out and is ends up being prettier. It ends up being more I don't know, like I don't know what's the word, but it ends up being just more it sort of going with your feeling in that moment. So if you get the plants, so if you have your pathways, that's mapped out, for example, and then you go and pick out your plants, then you're just able to sort of play with it and work around and move around the plants before you plant them. I find that sometimes people can get really obsessed with the drawing, and there's been jobs that I've been on where, the client has the piece of paper out and like a measuring tape, and it's like, well, this should be 5 inches over on the drawing. And it's like, you know what? Like, this feels better 5 inches over here, actually, And so I just worry sometimes with the drawing that maybe it makes it a little bit more stressful or something. And so I just think like if you can if you need to map out your pathways, and that's fine. That makes sense because that needs measurements and whatnot. But I think the plants can be a bit more fluid.
Yeah,
So,
I like that idea. I think
mhm,
I've helped many people with different kinds of garden designs, and I think having a general idea, having the pictures, having the plant choices on the pictures, really, really helpful. But when you get to the garden, you actually start planting, being able to move it around, make it what something that you really appreciate is always it connects you to your garden even a little bit more. You're gonna be the one
mhm.
living there, so enjoy the spaces and don't be too stressed out about the inch by inch separation.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we had some other people asking about more specific questions about taking care of certain plants, and we'd totally happy to help you out in the stores if you bring in some of those questions. One that was just kind of a good example, just asking about cutting back like lavender. When you're saying like it's time to cut back stuff to really open up space, they're wondering if it's really if that's going to kill the plants and stuff like that. I think that in general, a lot of people are nervous about the chop back. Is it going to affect the plant really negatively? And it does vary around the plant. But maybe what are your just thoughts on general, just full pruning and where you have to be careful?
Um, so I would say if you're really looking to do a massive so okay, what I would say is if you prune it, don't prune it back to the point of no leaves at this time of year. So with lavender, definitely you can prune it back, make sure that there's still some leaves on it, because then we have something to photosynthesize. Um, and then also the biggest thing I'd say this time of year for pruning is that you don't want to prune off the blooms, or just being aware of if you are pruning something back and it's about to bloom that you might not get blooms this year. Um, but other than that, like honestly, like I said, but don't be scared about pruning because the plants will just mo like most often respond really, really heartily to a good prune. It like I said, it reconcentrates that energy back to the core, and so that the plant is able to feed the roots, feed the leaves, all this stuff much
Yeah,
easier.
branch
When
out in a little bit more of a
Yeah,
nice.
branch
Um,
out, be softer, not as woody.
yeah,
And so I would say don't be scared to prune. And maybe, you lose a plant here and there, but like overall, I don't be go nuts with the pruning because it'll really be helpful.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then I think at this point we're gonna probably come to our close here. I want to thank everyone for their questions. If I didn't reach any of those, I apologize, but come in and talk to me in any of our stores or any of our other staff, and we will help with those kinds of questions. And I have many of them looking for a gardener in this location, or looking for a gardener that's
Mm-hmm.
really good at irrigation, or looking for a gardener that's looking really good for this. Really good questions. We have a lot of information on our website with gardener lists, as well as all of our stores have gardener recommendations for their local location. So ask
Hmm.
your local garden center and ask any of your Sloat employees for just one of the gardener lists, and we'll give that to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to say or like, fish out today, Jen?
No, I'm hoping that was helpful. And I'm hoping, like I said, to just sort of take that intimidation factor away just a little bit in the garden. Like Taylor said, we're here to help. So, whether it's in the store or having our consultants come out to your garden in person, you know, where we can help on whatever's best for your process, whatever level that is. And we can recommend gardeners and whatnot. And so, this is an exciting time of year. I mean, we really feel it in the nursery when we start seeing, trucks and trucks and trucks of like all these like really pretty plants coming in, and it's a really fun time and it's exciting. And so I just encourage everybody to get out there and plant some flowers, plant some trees.
Plant some trees, plant some flowers.
Hmm.
Yes. Thank you, Jen. And thank you everyone for joining us today for the live web videoing of this. If you want to join us for any more, go to our website, check out our YouTube page if you want to rewatch this. Just check out all the little slides, make sure you understand what's going on. And we'll be back with more. We have lots of veggie stuff coming up. So if you're going to be planting veggies, check our next upcoming events and have a good, happy spring.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Happy gardening.